The CSS Perennial Doubt had a reputation. Not the good kind. In a fleet where ships were named for concepts of victory, endurance, and celestial phenomena of imposing scale, the Perennial Doubt had been named, apparently, by someone who had read the maintenance reports first. The name was not official. The official name was CSS Korath 7, which was the kind of designation given to ships that procurement didn't want to invest in naming properly. The crew called it the Doubt, and the name had stuck with the particular adhesion of nicknames that were too accurate to dislodge. The Doubt was a Concordance patrol frigate of the Korath class, which was a class that had been considered adequate at its commissioning 22 years ago and had been superseded by 3 successive ship generations since. It had a crew complement of 40, a weapons loadout rated for light patrol duties, and a propulsion system that the engineering staff at Korath Station described, in the formal language of maintenance documentation, as operating within nominal parameters, with noted deviations in thrust efficiency, power distribution reliability, and drive calibration consistency. In plain language, it worked, mostly, when it wanted to. The Doubt had not had a commanding officer for months, which was its own statement. 3 successive commanders had requested transfer within 6 weeks of assignment. The first had cited mechanical unreliability. The second had cited crew morale. The third had not cited anything. Having submitted a transfer request consisting entirely of the sentence, "I would like a different assignment with no elaboration," which the Fleet Personnel Office had interpreted, correctly, as a request that was not going to benefit from additional discussion. The Doubt had been sitting in Korath Station's secondary dock, accruing maintenance debt and a certain philosophical weight for months. Commander Sable Oduya received the assignment on a Wednesday. She read the posting notification. She read the ship's maintenance file, which took 3 hours. She read the crew records, which took another 2. She read the 3 previous commanders' transfer requests and the 4th single sentence. Then she requested a departure slot for the following Monday and began packing. The Fleet Personnel Office noted, in her file, that she had not submitted a counter-request, a clarification inquiry, or any communication whatsoever beyond the departure slot request. They noted this because it was unusual. Every other officer who had been shown this assignment had responded with communication, usually quite a lot of it. What the Fleet Personnel Office did not know, because it was not in her file in any form they would have recognized as relevant, was what Sable Oduya had been doing for the 11 years before she joined the Concordance fleet. She had been born in Lagos, Nigeria, which was a city of approximately 25 million people on a continent that had spent 3 centuries teaching people to build things that worked in conditions that discouraged working things. Her father had been a marine engineer, not the theoretical kind. The kind who spent his career on vessels that the shipping companies had long since stopped investing in, keeping them operational through a combination of technical ingenuity, supply chain creativity, and the specific philosophy that a ship that was running was better than a ship that was theoretically perfect and docked. She had grown up on those ships, not visiting them, on them in the engine rooms, learning the difference between what the specification said a system could do and what the system actually did when you understood it well enough to push it. When she was 19, she had taken her first engineering certification. When she was 23, she had her master's ticket. When she was 31, she had spent 8 years on vessels that the major shipping lines had sold off because they weren't worth maintaining, bringing them to ports they theoretically couldn't reach, doing things with engines and hull systems and cargo configurations that the original designers had not anticipated and that her clients had not believed possible until they saw the cargo on the dock. She had joined the Concordance fleet at 32 because the recruiter had, somewhat recklessly, told her that the fleet had ships that nobody else could fix. She had considered this a professional opportunity. She had not, in the 3 years since, been given a ship that matched that description. She had been given ships that were merely difficult. She had managed them well and been given better ships, which was the standard fleet career progression and which was, she had concluded after 3 years, not actually what she was interested in. The doubts posting notification had landed in her queue like a gift. She had not explained this to the fleet personnel office because it would have taken longer than the departure slot request and would have produced more questions than answers. She arrived on the Doubt on a Sunday, 24 hours before her official departure slot, because she wanted a day with the ship before she had to be in command of it. The dock crew watched her come up the gangway with her bags and a data pad and stop at the threshold of the main airlock to put her hand flat on the hull for a moment, which was not standard officer behavior, and which the dock crew discussed afterward for longer than they probably needed to. She was feeling for vibration. The hull of a ship that was running told you things that the diagnostics didn't. The Doubt was running its environmental systems and minimal power plant, and the hull told her, through her palm, that the vibration signature was slightly off in the portside range, which she filed as a data point. She spent the day in the engineering spaces, not being briefed, not reviewing documentation. In the engineering spaces, with her sleeves rolled up, physically inspecting every system that the maintenance files had flagged and several that hadn't. She spoke to the chief engineer, a Horian named Gethsal, who had been on the Doubt for 6 years, and who had the expression of someone who had spent 6 years managing decline and was waiting to find out what variety of disappointment this commander would produce. She did not tell him her plan. She asked him questions. What she learned from the questions was that the Doubt was not, in fact, in the condition the maintenance files described. The maintenance files described a ship with 3 major systems in degraded condition and 7 minor systems requiring attention. What she found, through the questions and the inspection, was a ship with 3 major systems in degraded condition and 7 minor systems requiring attention that had been managed. Through Gethsal's work over 6 years, in ways that partially compensated for each other, the portside drive had a thrust efficiency deficit. The power distribution system had reliability issues under hydraulic conditions. The drive calibration drifted under sustained operation. What Gethsal had done, without having the resources to fix any of these problems properly, was arrange them so that they partially canceled each other out. The drift in drive calibration happened to correct, under specific power draw conditions, for the thrust efficiency deficit. The power distribution reliability issues were worst at power levels that the other 2 problems made suboptimal anyway. The ship was not 3 broken systems. It was 3 broken systems that had been jury-rigged into a specific configuration where the breakage was load-bearing. She looked at Gethsal, who was watching her with the careful attention of someone who had never had a commander understand this. "You've been keeping it this way deliberately," she said. "Yes," he said, carefully. She nodded slowly. She looked around the engineering space, with the expression of someone reading a text in a language they know well. "What happens," she said, "if we lean into this instead of fighting it?" Gethsal was quiet for a moment. Then, "I don't know. I've been managing it to maintain function. I haven't been trying to optimize it. That's what I'm going to find out," she said. She spent the first 3 weeks not doing what her crew expected. The crew of the Doubt, 40 beings of 7 species, who had served under 3 commanders in 14 months, and who had developed the specific psychological profile of people who were waiting to be abandoned again, expected one of 2 things. Either she would try to fix the ship's problems through standard maintenance protocols, which would fail because the resources required weren't available and the problems were more structural than patchwork repairs could address, and she would request a transfer. Or she would accept the ship's limitations and manage within them, which was what the previous 3 commanders had tried. And she would find the limitations unmanageable, and she would request a transfer. What she did instead was spend 3 weeks taking the ship apart and putting it back together in a configuration that did not exist in any Concordance fleet engineering manual. This was not, technically, a violation of fleet regulations. Fleet regulations required that ships be maintained in operable condition. They specified certain minimum standards. They did not specify the precise arrangement by which those standards were to be achieved, largely because the authors of fleet regulations had not anticipated anyone achieving those standards through the means she was using. The means were, in summary, she took everything that was broken and arranged it so that the way it was broken was an asset rather than a liability. The portside drive thrust deficit meant that the ship's standard straight-line acceleration was below spec. Compensating for this through the drive calibration system, instead of fighting it, meant that the ship's turning performance in high-thrust maneuvers was significantly above spec, because the calibration correction that would have been suppressed to maintain straight-line thrust was instead allowed to express itself directionally. The power distribution reliability issues meant that under certain high-draw conditions, power to specific systems became unpredictable. The standard response was to limit power draw to avoid those conditions. Her response was to map exactly which conditions triggered which reliability failures, and then design power management protocols that used the failures as switching mechanisms, directing power along the paths that were currently reliable in a sequence that was, once mapped, entirely predictable. The drive calibration drift, which Gethsal had been compensating for manually during sustained operations, she turned into a programmed variance that she could control. A drive that drifted in a predictable pattern was not a drive with a reliability problem. It was a drive with a variable thrust vector, which was a feature she could use. At the end of 3 weeks, the Doubt did not look different from the outside. Its maintenance status report still showed the same 3 major issues and 7 minor ones. On paper, it was the same ship. In practice, it was a different thing entirely. She gathered her crew in the main briefing room and told them what she had done, not all of it. The engineering details were Gethsal's domain, and she directed them there for specifics. What she told them was the operational implication. "We are not a standard patrol frigate," she said. "We are not going to operate like one. Our speed in a straight line is below spec. Our weapons loadout is patrol weight. Our sensor suite is 2 generations old." She let this sit for a moment. "What we are," she said, "is a ship that turns faster than anything in the fleet at our tonnage. That has a power management system that can reroute under fire faster than any automated system because it was designed around knowing exactly what will fail and when, and it has a drive variance that makes our approach vector actively unpredictable to targeting systems that assume consistent thrust output." She looked at them. "We are not the worst ship in the fleet," she said. "We are the ship that was built wrong and fixed wrong for 22 years. Until someone figured out that built wrong and fixed wrong in the right configuration is something different from both of those things." The crew was quiet. Gethsal, from the back of the room, said, "What do you call this configuration?" She thought about it for a moment. Honestly broken, she said, "Everything wrong is wrong in exactly the way we need it to be." The first operational test came 6 weeks after she took command. The situation was a Veth Raider group operating in the Karath corridor's outer transit lanes. 3 vessels of moderate armament that had been running a consistent pattern of interdicting commercial traffic and withdrawing before any concordance response could be coordinated. The pattern had run for 2 months. The concordance's attempts to intercept had failed because the raiders' timing was precise. They identified any approaching concordance vessel early enough to break off and transit out before engagement could be forced. The Doubt was assigned to the patrol area because it was available. This was stated, not unkindly but without particular tact, in the patrol assignment briefing. She read the briefing and the pattern analysis and said to her tactical officer, of pill-named TIIs who had been on the Doubt for 3 years, "What's their early detection range?" TIIs had the pattern data. 200,000 kilometers based on observed response times. "So they see us coming at 200,000, she said, "and we're below spec approach speed because of the drive deficit." "How much below spec?" "Roughly 17%. "In a straight approach?" She nodded. "What's our approach speed in a non-straight approach?" TIIs processed this. "In what kind of non-straight approach?" She told him. He was quiet for a moment. Then, "I've never run this calculation for this ship." "Run it," she said. He ran it. The drive variance, the turning performance above spec due to the calibration configuration, the power management protocols. He ran the numbers 3 times because the first 2 results seemed incorrect. They weren't incorrect. They were just not what he had been modeling the ship as capable of. "Commander," he said, "in a spiral approach at maximum drive variance expression, I know what the number is," she said. "I want to know if you calculated it the same way." He had. The Raider group's early detection range was based on standard patrol frigate approach profiles. Straight line or broad curve approaches that sensor systems could track continuously and from which closing speed and time to contact could be reliably predicted. The Doubt's spiral approach, using maximum drive variance expression in the above spec turning performance, did not produce a trackable continuous approach profile. It produced an approach profile that, to an external sensor system, looked like a ship that was having serious navigational problems. Which, from a certain perspective, it was. At 160,000 kilometers, the distance at which the Raider group would need to begin their break-off sequence to guarantee clean transit, the Doubt's spiral approach appeared on the Raider's sensors as a vessel at approximately 230,000 kilometers, moving in a direction that suggested it was not actually approaching. The Doubt was at the Raider group's operational position before they recognized it as a threat. The engagement lasted 11 minutes. 2 Raider vessels escaped. The 3rd did not. Kurith Station's operations commander, Colonel Vrestal, read the operational report twice. Then he called up the Doubt's spec sheet. He looked at the spec sheet. He looked at the report. He looked at the spec sheet again. He called his tactical analysis officer. "Run me an analysis of the approach vector for CSS, Kurith 7's engagement this morning," he said. "I want to know how a ship with these specifications executed this approach profile." The analysis officer came back 2 hours later looking like someone who had found something interesting in an unexpected location. "Sir," she said, "I don't think those specifications describe what that ship actually is anymore. The reputation built the way reputations build in operational environments, through the consistent gap between what something was expected to do and what it actually did. After the 4th engagement, Vrestal wrote a formal note in the operational log. CSS Kurith 7 under Commander Oduya is to be assessed as a non-standard asset with non-standard capability. Standard patrol frigate threat assessments do not apply. After the 6th engagement, the note was updated. CSS Kurith 7 is the recommended response asset for interdiction situations. In the Kurith Outer Corridor, where early detection avoidance is operationally relevant. Standing advisement: do not rely on approach speed specifications for tactical planning. plan for actual performance. After the 9th engagement, the Veth Separatist operational briefings that Concordance Intelligence had access to contained a specific notation for CSS, Korath 7, that translated from the Veth Operational Communication Standard as, "Do not assume this vessel is where sensors indicate, and do not assume it is doing what it appears to be doing." This was, in the notation vocabulary of enemy intelligence assessments, the equivalent of a formal acknowledgement of the problem. A patrol frigate with patrol-weight armament and a 22-year-old hull that enemy intelligence felt it necessary to flag specifically was not, functionally, the worst ship in the fleet. It was something else entirely. What it was, in the assessment of the crew who had been there for the transformation, was harder to put in a report. Gethsal had the closest thing to a definition developed over the months of watching it happen. When you ask us what kind of ship we are, he would tell dock crews at whatever station they passed through. His tone, the particular flatness of someone not trying to sell anything, we're the ship that's exactly as broken as we need to be. And it was true, and it was sufficient, and it was the thing that the spec sheet would never say. Because the spec sheet described what the ship had been built to be, not what it had been broken into.